Mr. McGinnis. It's my pleasure to get to introduce you. Since 1992, Bill has been a trustee for the East Glen Community College District, the city of Chico. In addition, Bill serves as a board member of the California Educational Authority, on the board of directors for the Campaign for College Opportunity, on the appeals team for the Accreditation Commission of Community and Junior Colleges, as a member of the League's Commission on Future. Between 1997 and 2006, Bill also served on the California Community Colleges Trustee Board of Directors, including 1 year as president, as well as president of the Community College League of California. During the past decade, Bill has served as an outside consultant advising boards of trustees in over 30 different districts for both CCLC and ACCJC. In addition, Bill has consulted overseas in Russia, Kazakhstan, and in the Northern Marianas Islands. The League also uses Bill as a trainer in the Effective Trustee Program and a frequent presenter at trustee and system-wide conferences. Bill's public service includes 18 years as an administrator for the California State University Chico and 17 years as an administrator in local governments, primarily as the city manager and in human resources. While with the CSU, Bill also served 2 years as the system-wide coordinator for facilities management and taught political science courses for 4 years at CSU, Ohio. Bill's educational background includes a Bachelor of Science, a degree in Business Administration from Midwestern College, a Master of Arts degree in Public Administration from the University of West Florida, as well as Executive Leadership Certificates from both Stanford and Notre Dame universities. Bill is also a veteran of the United States Air Force, and we thank you very much for your service, sir.
Thanks very much. So, Bill, I'd like to have the students introduce themselves to you. Start with Alma there, who just introduced you.
Oh, yes. Alma Martinez-Egger, Tarrant County College, Director of Staff Development.
And please speak up because the microphone is not picking up real good, though. So please speak up.
Alma Martinez-Egger, Tarrant County College, Director of Staff Development.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Candy Center. I'm Dean of Academic Affairs and Interim Vice President of Academic Affairs for TCC Connect, which is our virtual campus here at Tarrant County College.
All right.
Good morning, and thank you for your service, sir. My name is Joseph Cameron, and I'm the Dean of Healthcare Professions here at Tarrant County College.
Thank you.
Good morning, Norma Guzman Duran, Assistant Director of Clinical Relations, Tarrant County College, Trinity River.
Good morning, sir. My name is Andrew Duffield. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer for Tarrant County College.
All right.
Good morning, sir. My name is Luana Forster. I'm Executive Director of the Center for Workplace Learning at Graces College.
Good morning, Diana Urrutia from Richland College. I'm Instructional Dean for the School of World Languages, Cultures, and Communication.
Good morning, sir. My name is Kenny Evans. I am the Registrar for the Southeast Campus of Tarrant County College.
Good morning, I'm Chantel Reynolds from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Greetings, I'm Tyson Quillen, the Program Coordinator for this wonderful team. I'm a founding faculty member of the Trinity River campus and the Department of Computer Science. And we welcome you here today, and we look forward to hearing from you today as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, students, and thanks, Tyson. Bill, it's great to have you with us. I would like, first of all, to ask your permission to record this. We have a student who couldn't be here today, so is it okay if we record?
Oh, certainly.
Great, thank you. So, Bill, we heard that introduction from Alma, and of course, the students have seen your bio, but I wonder if we could start by having you tell us a little bit more about yourself, maybe some influential people or significant events that helped shape your career.
Certainly, George. Thank you. And thank you all for inviting me. There's quite a variety of background among your class, and I hope you all take an opportunity to talk to each other about your missions and how your individual programs help students achieve their dreams. As far as additional items in my bio, I found that once I became a trustee for a community college, I really became interested in its mission, and more so than before I even decided to run. And our role in serving the students in our community and in our communities is so vital that I find it a real rewarding role. The things that have helped me along the way, of course, first was working as a city manager and a county administrative officer for boards. That gave me a lot of background in how to deal with elected officials. I also served, I also worked for a very brief time as a lobbyist for the State Employees Association here in California. And that experience gave me a lot of knowledge about how to work the state legislature and how bills move through and that sort of thing. So it really helped me throughout my career. The kinds of people that I found very helpful to me, of course, were first when I worked in city government, were the city managers that I worked for, specifically a city manager in Chico, Fred Davis, that really taught me how to do thorough research work and prepare items for city councils and also to sit through long city council meetings. And then when it's your turn to act like you're bright and fresh and ready to go at 2 a.m. in the morning. It was good training. And then I've had the opportunity to serve on some committees with very distinguished people and be able to see their minds work and understand their philosophies and really learn from them. And George is one of those people that I've learned from over the years by having a good background that he has in higher education. In fact, I think he provided you with a copy of a paper that I am trying to get published right now. And George is one of those people that helped me edit that paper and gave me a lot of good ideas of what to put in and take out of it. That's about all I can think of, George.
Thanks very much, Bill. So can you talk a little bit about the kind of issues that trustees deal with both in meetings and perhaps outside of meetings?
Yeah, the role of trustee is quite broad. I mean, the things that come before us run the gamut, but mostly we're focused on the budget, of course. And when we have the budget working and don't need to focus on it, then we can spend our attention on other matters such as student success. And it's an unfortunate thing that we do have to spend so much time on the budget. And in our particular case at my college, we're seeing a decline in enrollment. And that decline drives the budget down because so much of our budget is tied to our enrollment, as in many public institutions. And so we spend considerable time talking about what we can do to bring more students in and increase enrollment, what kind of programs do we need to change, and that sort of thing. When we're not focusing on the real important goal, and that is how we can improve the institution to help students move through more easily and get the education and training they need to find those jobs or to move on to a university, and then to look at our performance. You really struggle with that need to move off the budget and move on to student success. The other kinds of things, of course, we deal with are bonds, typically bonds, buildings, and budgets, and normally what trustees deal with. And right now, we just had a fairly large bond issue for our institution. And so we're following with the staff the time schedule of when buildings will be started and that sort of thing, and how that'll affect our mission as a college. The other issues that we end up dealing with that are really unfortunate is termination of employees. And that could be quite difficult conversation, especially if you have somebody in a high-level position. And we just, in fact, we just dealt with that recently. And, you know, it came down to having to make a tough choice whether the person's liabilities outweigh their advantages to the institution, and support the staff in their recommendation, or the administration, excuse me, in their recommendation to terminate the individual. That is a very difficult conversation, and I would advise anybody that's wanting to be a CEO to really think through the information that you give a president, give a board of trustees in that kind of situation, and make sure that the information is thorough, complete, and you have the answers they need to make those kinds of tough calls. The other part of what we deal with outside of meetings is really public interaction about what's going on at the institution. And I have a funny story. You're always sensitive to not wanting to politic for individual organizations or individual people. But one day, my mailman stopped me and told me that his daughter had tried a couple times to get into the college's nursing program and had been unsuccessful. And that's because our program's impacted and we have a fairly long waiting list. And I told him, well, I'll see what's going on and I'll get back to you, of course. And I was a little worried what might happen to my mail delivery if I didn't respond to this individual. And unfortunately, I found the information about how the process worked, and I met with him another day. He was delivering the mail, and I explained to him how the process worked, and I thought that his daughter would probably be successful in her attempt, and thank goodness he responded and say, "Oh, it's not a problem anymore. My daughter's been accepted into the program." Unfortunately for me, I never said his name. When I talked to the administration, I never told the administration the student's name. I was really just trying to find out how the process worked. And it just was so lucky for me that his daughter had been accepted. So he felt like I had some influence in this decision, and I never tried to change his mind. So constituents, and then the other part is when you get lobbied by businesses in the community. I had another case where my dentist was over my mouth trying to do a filling and started telling me about how the college needed to set up a dental hygienist program. And you know, you get in some uncomfortable positions sometimes in this job. But anyways, you have to be careful about who tries to influence you and how you respond to those influences.
Thanks very much, Bill. So I know you do a lot of training for trustees around the state of California. Are there things that trustees should be spending more time studying, or maybe some things they spend too much time on?
You know, right now there's some programs to help students be more successful in college. One of the projects that's starting in California is called the Guided Pathways Project. And it really, I think it's a throwback to the way I went to college, I think. And that is when you're enrolled, you had a very specific plan to follow in order to graduate. And there weren't a lot of detours that you could take. I know when I worked at Chico State, the State University here in Chico, the students came in and they were told, okay, you need to take 3 of these kinds of classes, 4 of those kinds of classes, etc. And the student would look out there and there'd be a menu of options a mile long of the kinds of classes they could take. And they would sort of, take whatever fit their time schedule rather than what best fit their educational plan. And so it was a mishmash of courses. And sometimes it would add to the fact that it would take them 5 or 6 years or longer to graduate from the university. And so we saw that same thing occurring at the community college, where students were being offered a whole variety of classes, and they would sometimes get lost in that maze. And so now through this Guided Pathways project, we're really trying to give them pathways where they can more easily follow and get through and get their degrees in 2 years or a little bit longer. So trustees need to be aware of those kinds of projects that are coming out, and then how they can help foster that development in the college. Of course, they can't direct things like that. That's really faculty driven, but they can ask questions about it. They can offer suggestions and be involved with making sure there's sufficient money in the budget for those projects, et cetera. The other thing that trustees really need to be aware of and focus on in their institution now is student equity. Are the students of color performing in our institutions? And we really don't spend enough time on that. And we need to spend more, I think, as a state. We find that some institutions could have 60 to 70% Latino students, and their graduation rates are down around 25 to 30% or lower. And the Latinos are even less than that. And so they need to address what's happening in that situation. And it's not just what is happening at our college, but what's happening before the student ever walks in our door. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. In California, we have a measurement in the high school level of students that says if you take classes that are what they call A through G in different categories, you're eligible then to attend the state university or the UC, the University of California system, coming right out of high school. So that's a high school plan that prepares students for college work. And when you look at how many students are achieving those plans around the state, it varies anywhere from 60% down to 0. And the zeros are occurring in very small institutions in the mountainous areas of California. But typically, in the average in the state is about 45%. So only 45% of our students are coming out of high school prepared. And so I looked at this data for our 2 counties that we serve as an institution and found that it ranged from 19% to 26%. We did have a couple high schools that were up in the 40s, but most of them were down in the teens and 20s. In fact, the average for each of the 2 counties, one county averages 25%, the other county averages 19%. So our students aren't being prepared for college coming to us. So we need, as an institution, to look at what we can do to assist those high school systems in preparing the students. And so we're starting what's called a dual enrollment program, and where we can enroll students in high school in college courses to help prepare them so that when they graduate from high school, they'll have some college credit and be college ready. And it's just like an industrial organization. If it's sitting there looking at why its product quality is any good, they start to look at the raw product coming into them and how they can improve that raw product. And that's really what we're doing now. We're looking at the product that comes to us and try to work with the manufacturers of that product, to see how we can improve that. So that's a new issue for trustees. They're just becoming aware of it and really taking a look. And our role in that, of course, is to communicate to the high school trustees or those school boards and tell them we're not trying to take over their institution, but we're trying to help their students. The other way, of course, is to provide, for those students who don't want to go to college, is to see how we can offer technical or career training programs such as automotive technology and building industry technology or nursing or automotive, those kinds of prep classes at the high school level. Because most of our high schools, because of budget problems, have eliminated their vocational training programs. So the students that come out that aren't college ready really aren't ready for anything. So we're trying to see how we can help them on both ends, get either college ready or get ready for training in occupational programs. The other kinds of things that we're dealing with now, of course, is student safety and in the lockdown situations, or in our case, wildfires and that sort of thing. And then also dealing with issues that affect free speech. And that's becoming a big topic of mainly at the university level, but I'm sure it's going to start hitting us at the community college level. We had, in our particular college, we had somebody put up what I would consider vulgar posters that were insensitive to some of our students on campus. And we immediately got those down. Fortunately, they didn't follow the process of publication of material on the campus, so it was easy to remove those items. But again, we will have to face that struggle if and when it hits us about free speech for extreme positions on both ends and how to deal with that. And if I can jump into that, George, is that right?
Sure.
This is my personal view, because we haven't taken this up as a board yet. But I've had situations where board members have attacked each other during a board meeting or outside the board meeting. They write a letter to the editor and they say, my colleagues on the board are really nuts. They don't know what they're doing. Or they write a letter to the editor trying to disparage the reputation of the college president and that sort of thing. And so I've been invited in to meet with those boards and try to resolve their problem with their dysfunctional trustee. And, and I met with dysfunctional trustees telling me, hey, wait a minute, I have free speech. I can say whatever I want. And I try to tell them, you do have free speech, but the right to free speech. But what's the impact of your free speech? What's the impact on your participation with the board and that sort of thing? Are you really trying to educate or trying to help your colleagues make a better decision, or are you just trying to disparage them and insult them? And then if you are just trying to insult them, why do you expect them to work with you? And so I think the same thing we need to look at with outside speakers coming to our campuses. I think we have to, as a board, retain that right that at a college, we need to have all kinds of expressions be allowed. But we have to have our students understand that the college doesn't support any of those positions. We're just allowing somebody to talk about it, and they need to give them the respect that they would want when they would be talking about their position, and listen to it. And then afterwards, then we can have a debate as to whether or not that speaker was good or not. I think back to a class I took at the university where we had a speaker come in and try to persuade the students that adult child sex should be not seen as a problem in our society, that there are advantages and there's nothing wrong with adult child sex. And I could not, as a parent, get my head around this. I was already a parent. But I sat there respectfully and listened to this man's position. And then at the following class meeting, when we had a class discussion about the topic, I literally told the professor, look, anybody touches my kids like that, I'm after them. And I couldn't stand for that kind of situation to occur. That's just a moral value that I have. And so we were able to argue about that and never really came to a position. It was really trying to allow us to comprehend what other people think and expand our paradigm, so to speak. Anyways, I think we have, as a board, have to try to create places and opportunities for people of various opinions to speak, to allow students to hear that and understand that some people are nuts and they shouldn't follow them.
But not us.
But at the same time, we shouldn't foster those kinds of people or attitudes in our institutions. It's one thing to allow people to have the opportunity to speak. It's another thing to foster their concepts and to try to create climates for extremism on either side. And, to me, what's going on right now with the problems in race relations in our society really bother me, because my first job outside of college was working in trying to deal with segregated schools in Alabama and Florida and desegregate a city organization in North Florida. And I know the trouble I went through to do that. And it just bothers me to see attitudes coming back that sort of say, well, that wasn't that important. And it really bothers me. But I know that I still have to be open to people who want to voice those kinds of concepts and try to then follow that up with education to our students and how those people really don't speak the truth and should not be followed. I got off my soapbox now.
Well, thanks, Bill. It's great to see that trustees are going beyond the buildings and budgets and bonds to talk about some pretty significant educational issues. So that's good to see. Can you tell us a little bit about how trustees get prepared for their roles? In California, you're elected. I think in Texas, the trustees are also elected. Is that right? But in some states, they're appointed. How do trustees get oriented or prepared for their roles after they're elected or appointed?
We don't do a good enough job on preparing trustees. One of the problems with electing trustees is you can get all sorts of people be elected, and they could not have any background. Now, I shouldn't say elections per se are bad, because I've seen appointed officials to boards really not have any good understanding of why they're there and what they're doing. So it's not that elected trustees are worse than appointed trustees, don't get me wrong. But you can get people who are elected who have a single cause, or they're not really fully understanding what's happening to what happens in the institutions and that sort of thing. So it's really important that when a trustee gets elected to the board, that the president and preferably the chairman or the president of the board spend considerable time onboarding or training that new trustee or a group of new trustees. In our institution, what we try to do is right after the board members are sworn into their role. Well, let me back up. Before they're sworn in, before they're even elected, we send them copies of our agendas. So while they're campaigning, they know what the college is doing. They're invited in to attend board meetings. They're invited in to talk to the president. And then once they're elected and seated, then we go into a formal training program with them. And so our trustees are, for our college, are seated in the first meeting in December. So later in December, right after they're seated, we'll have an all-day meeting with them. And in our institution, I've been invited in to meet with the trustees and really answer their questions about how the board functions, but also to describe to them the culture of our board. And culture and values of a board are really important because it sets the tone about how they'll act in our board meetings. We don't have a formal code of conduct, but I explain to them the kinds of things that we do and that we don't do, and how we operate, and how our board has been focused on the goals of the institution, the higher level operation of the institution, and not into the minutia, and not telling directors how to do things, not going out into the athletic fields and telling the coach how to cut the grass and that sort of thing. That's not our role. And so then the president of the college meets with the new trustee and talks through the college and all the technical things about where do you park for board meetings and how we get the agendas to you. But most important and critical is how to communicate. So both the president and the trustee leave that meeting understanding how each will communicate with the other, how they can get their questions answered, how we get the agendas out to them, and how they can ask questions about the agenda before the meeting so they have a better understanding, or the staff is prepared to give them more information during the meeting. I have found that communication between the CEO and board members has created more problems for CEOs than anything else. And if you can resolve that communication link and understand that the information, the kind of information that trustee is going to need, you're way ahead of the game. And then we followed that up with league training. When I say the state league, in our case, meets in January, and they have a day and a half to 2 day session now for new trustees. We bring speakers in, other trustees have been around for a while, and they talk about all the different programs and all the responsibilities of trustees and the legal issues. In our case, what's called the Brown Act, how you have to communicate in public, how you cannot have private meetings to discuss college business and that sort of thing. We see trustees getting in trouble for stupid little things, dealing with their expense claims. So we talk to them about ethics and how to be clear with their expenses and that sort of thing. And then, so that's January. Then in February and March, again, the CEO should be reaching out to that new trustee and making sure they understand what's going on with the agenda and the issues going on. And on a quarterly basis, then, they have an individual meeting with that new trustee and the president and just talk about, first of all, again, is the communication link working? Are you getting the data you need and the way you understand it? Is there anything else we can do there? And then the president needs to somehow also tell the trustee politely how they're doing. Give them some indication if they're providing the support and that sort of thing in a proper way during the board meeting. I then follow up, in our case, with a meeting about 6 months out to sit down with the trustee and say, how's it going? Do you understand how our board works? Are you feeling frustrated? Are we listening to you? Do you feel like your voice is being heard during our board meetings? And that sort of thing, because I want them to feel part of our team, that we've spent years creating a board that really works together as a team. And as we bring new trustees in, we want to embrace them and bring them into that team feeling. And it was difficult. I can tell you from a personal case, it was difficult with one trustee because during the election, during his campaign, he was talking about all these old guys on the board and how they were getting outdated. They needed to be replaced by some young blood and that sort of thing. And he got elected. So here he was, just talking bad about us during the campaign. And now all of a sudden we have to bring him on the board and embrace him as one of our teammates and bring him on to the team. And so, I had to, when I was doing my meeting with him, be very respectful to him and hear what he had to say and that sort of thing, and not have any animosity towards him for what he said in the campaign. And it was in this particular case, it worked well. He became a very good team member. In fact, he's president of our board right now. And he hasn't attacked anybody in the 4 years he's been on the board. So I've seen it work. And in other institutions, I've seen where it hasn't worked. And I think the reason it hasn't worked is that they really never took the time to bring him on as a team member and look for those issues they could build bridges of agreement on before they got into difficult situations. Then about a year out, the president needs to really follow up with that trustee, even though he met with him quarterly. But we have a board retreat where we sit down and go through how we're working as a board with the president and how and what can the board do to improve itself, because we do a self-evaluation and we talk about how we can improve as a board. The other thing that I would, I don't know how the presidents can really foster this kind of communication, but maybe find a trustee that can help induce the other trustees to do this. But all our trustees meet with the president on a quarterly basis, on an individual basis, quarterly throughout the year. And I start those meetings with my question to the president of, how am I doing as a trustee? Am I speaking too much? Am I not speaking up enough? Am I being too directive? And that sort of thing. And then how can the board help you succeed? What do we need to do to help you get better, be better, or whatever? And I'll give you an example of this. Our president a year ago was a new president, and she said, I really want some flexibility where I can attend some training programs for new presidents. And so she met with us individually and talked about that, and I encouraged her to bring it forward to the board as an issue, and also to talk about, she didn't need our approval for it, but to consider getting a mentor or a rabbi and somebody that she could call on in a confidential manner and talk through issues who aren't at our institution and not on our board, so she could get some good feedback about what to do. And so she has. She's approached a retired college president, and that president has become her mentor. For me to know that she has a mentor is one thing, and I appreciate that, but I don't talk to her about what she's talking to the mentor about. I don't ask her if she's, talked this issue through or anything, because that's her job and not mine. Then if the board is still having problems and in pulling together as a team, it may be necessary for a board to bring in an outside consultant to do some team building discussions with them. I'm not encouraging you to go out to a ropes course and have people drop off a cliff and have the other trustees try to catch them or anything. They might not try. But really, in a team meeting, in a round table like you have there, and just set the trustees in a U shape and have them talk about their board meetings and how they could be more effective and how they could have better communication. And it doesn't always work. I have to admit that. I've had trustee workshops where in the middle of the workshop, trustees started calling each other names. And that didn't help build bridges, of course. And, but I really try to encourage them to find areas that they can agree on. What is it that you all want to work towards? And a lot of that is student success. And if you can focus on, if you can get the board to continually focus on student success and how those issues supports student success, then maybe you can create some kind of agreement and working relationship with the board.
Thanks, Bill. So you mentioned earlier about some of the important decisions that trustees have. Do trustees have all the information they need to make decisions, or sometimes do they get too much information, or do some trustees need more information than other trustees?
Yeah, it's interesting. I ran into this in my working career, and then of course with trustees, it's the same thing. I did some training years ago on communication, and the people that I worked with identified 4 different kinds of communication styles. And the interesting thing about it is there's such a big gap between one kind of person and another kind of person that if a president doesn't understand that, they could be communicating in such a way that the trustees is not hearing them. I'll give you an example. They talk about an analyst type of communication style. And that's a person who can never really get enough information. They always want more detail and that sort of thing. So if you have a trustee like that on your board, you have to recognize it so that you understand you're going to need that. You're going to need to give that trustee and the board more detailed information than other board members may need. And some board members can very quickly grasp an issue, very little detail, and reach a decision. And those trustees need to understand that their colleagues on the board can't decide in the same way they can. And so they need to give them time to do that. I had a perfect example just the other day with our board, where the staff came to us, gave a report. Based on their report, I was ready to make a motion and move forward. And I looked at my colleagues on the board and I realized there were still some issues. And so rather than make a motion, I asked the president, is it time to make a motion? And the other board members go, no, we need this, we need that. And so that encouraged them to then ask their questions and get their information that they needed in order to achieve their ability to make a decision. And and I sort of sat back and listened to it to see if there was anything that would change my mind, of course. And we had some conversations then among the board regarding that issue. And finally, 20 minutes later, when all the board members were finally satisfied with the amount of information they had, I then went ahead and made my motion and we reached a decision. So it's the ability of the president to understand what everybody on that board needs and the level of information. And it's incumbent upon the trustees to communicate that need to the president. So as I mentioned earlier about meeting with the president early on, right after they're appointed, and talk about communication, it's really, you need to pick up as a president the communication style and the needs of that trustee so that you can better communicate with them in such a way that they're going to be able to make decisions and feel comfortable making those decisions. Now, we don't always agree on a decision. We'll have, in our board, we have 7 members. So we'll have a 6-1 vote or a 5-2 vote or a 4-3 vote. In fact, we had an absence the other day. We had only 6 board members. And we ended up with a 3-3 vote on an issue. So we don't always agree, but we respect each other enough to where we move beyond that decision and then try to accomplish what the goal is of that decision that we did make, or if we were unable to make a decision, to then say, let's rethink this and see what kind of new information we can get in order to be comfortable making a decision.
Thanks, Bill. Well, I did share your recent paper on rogue trustees with the students, and of course, Terry O'Banion has written quite a bit about this as well. And I know you do a lot of consulting throughout the state. How prevalent is it for trustees to have a rogue member?
Well, in most of the consulting jobs I've done, it's been because of a rogue trustee. I think I had a reputation in the state when they had a problem. They asked me to come in and sort of have a come to Jesus meeting with the trustee that's giving them a problem, and or try to get the board to deal with it, and slap them upside the side of the head and try to get them to act better. It's really difficult for me as a consultant to really go in and make the change. First of all, how prevalent is it? I would say it's becoming less of an issue now in the last few years, but at one time it was quite prevalent, and I think it's starting to swing back that way. I think the national political scene has created an arena where people think it's okay to be disrespectful in public and not work as a team, but to prove they're a maverick or they're going to fix it themselves, and so they disparage their colleagues on the board, they disparage the president, and they are looking for headlines, and so I think I've tried to explain to trustees like that they're really not going to be able to accomplish their goals if they don't work as a team a member with the board. That if they go in there and try to just lambast everybody, that they're going to be isolated, and rightfully so, and not accomplish what they want. So it's difficult for them to understand that, and they challenge me on that, and I try to give them illustrations of cases where I've seen it not work. Back in the San Diego Tribune, I was quoted one time telling a trustee that, the fact that you can't believe any of your colleagues on the board, you think they're all lying to you, you really need to get off the board. And of course, the headline in the paper was, "Consultant tells trustee to resign." That made me real famous in the state. But anyway, it's really a problem that the board has to approach as a board. Initially, well, let me back up for a second. You all are trying to become college presidents or vice presidents. It's not your role to fix a rogue trustee. Now, you can help provide information maybe to that trustee to help them make a better decision, but it's not your role to fix it. It's really the board's role, and primarily the chairman of the board or the president of the board. That person, as I've said in my paper, really needs to sit down and try to mentor that trustee, that disruptive trustee, and try to explain how that person could be more effective, but also to find out why that person doesn't believe they're being heard, why they are disruptive. Do they think nobody listens to them, and that sort of thing, and try to help them if they do feel they're not being listened to help them find a way to be heard and have their voice heard or their issue heard and that sort of thing. Sometimes they have a very legitimate issue. I'll give you an example. I went to a board where there was one Latino trustee, and the trustee kept saying to the board, "We've got to study how Latino students are not doing well in our institution. Why do we have a huge dropout rate for Latino students?" And the board wasn't listening to that, wasn't being supportive. So in that kind of a case, you have to talk to the board about how they need to allow people to be heard and feel part of the team and work with them to explore those issues if they are legitimate issues, and resolve those things as a college and work with the president to resolve them. So, you really have to take them on an individual basis. But I am real scared from what's happening on a federal level and on a state level, that's going to permeate down into community college level, and we're going to end up with boards that are very divisive and not able to reach agreement because there's these extreme positions being taken by board members.
Thanks, Bill. There are always a lot of stories in Chronicle of Higher Ed or Inside Higher Ed about problems between boards and CEOs. Sometimes CEOs get fired even early in their tenure with a district. And you mentioned a little bit about how you meet with the CEO and talk about how she's doing and how you're doing as a trustee. What kinds of things tell a board whether the CEO is doing the job right? And how can you provide feedback to the CEO to get her on the right track?
Yeah, what we've tried to do, and we've been in our college, we've been very successful with CEOs. We have not had to terminate any CEO in the 25 years I've been on the board for cause. In fact, we haven't even told any CEO to leave. We've encouraged them always to stay. We've been very successful. I think the first step is the selection of a CEO, and that is for a board to be very sure about what they're looking for in a CEO and how that CEO will fit into the culture of the institution and their communication style, not only with the institution, but with the board. And does that trustee have the talents, or excuse me, that president have the talents that you're looking for? Not just the education, but the talents. And then once you get a new president on board, you really have to support that person, especially in their first 2 or 3 years. And the support comes from one, sitting down immediately after that president is appointed with the full board and talk through how you're going to communicate and how the information will flow out, how it will flow in, how each trustee wants to communicate, whether it's by phone, by email, by postal mail, whatever it is. Then to talk about the goals and the values of the institution so that that president knows what the board expects and what do you want that president to do in their first year. And of course, you have to be realistic as a board about what a president can do in their first year. So can they be expected to turn around a failing institution, or is it merely to get things in place in order to turn the institution around? So we have to be realistic about what the president can get accomplished. I try to remind trustees that leading a college is like driving a battleship. It takes a long time to turn that sucker. It's not a little speedboat. And so, you have to give the president time to make those changes. Be supportive of a new president. And, during that first year, really try to, even if you disagree with a recommendation of a president, to try to work it out so the president is not seen as losing. You want them to feel as if they're able to come away with respect and trust with the board and all the decisions. And take that time individually to meet with the president so that you can reaffirm how you're supportive of the president and give the president an opportunity to get educated and find a mentor. And from the president's side, I really recommend new presidents to get a mentor during their first couple of years at least, and find people they can trust outside the institution that they can talk to about things. And then how the kind of level of trust you can build up with your trustees as well. So I think I've worked with 5 presidents now, and the things that we talk about on a personal basis, I never pass that information on to even my colleagues. I want that president to believe and to understand that when we talk about personal issues, they're confidential, and I will support that person in that role. But give them the time to go away and see how other people do it. Give them the time to have a mentor and talk about how they can do it better, and then allow them to grow into the position. And as a president grows into the position, the board boards have a tendency to transfer power from themselves to the president. And so the president starts to have a little more authority in how things are done at the institution. With a new president, the staff will look to the board more and see if the board's going to make sure the president follows how things are done. And there's always a struggle with the academic senate or faculty unions, regular unions, whatever, and the president to sort of see how this president is built and what they're up to. So it's our role to really help them build the self-confidence they need to be successful in that role with us. And the way I try to explain this to trustee boards by saying, look, you've spent a considerable amount of time and a considerable amount of money to bring this person in. And when you brought him in, you were in love with him and you were ready to marry him. Don't get a quickie divorce over something little. Try to figure out how you can keep that marriage, so to speak, working. And the best way to do that is to have open communication. I went into one board to work with them. They were having trouble, they said, with their president. And I come to find out that the president had been there a year and had never met with the board or individual board members to talk through how they would communicate and how things would work in the organization. And the problem they were having was communication. So, you can't wait a year because you may find yourself being terminated by an unsophisticated board.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to ask one more question and then give the students a chance to ask you some questions. So we were talking before we beamed you in about interactions, social interactions perhaps between college employees and trustees. You may have friendships with employees of the college. What are the boundaries there where you should not be talking about college business versus social kinds of conversation? And what do people think about that if they see an employee talking with a trustee? That's an interesting situation. I was at one board and they had a new trustee, and we were going through how trustees were supposed to act on campus and communicate with employees and that sort of thing. And the trustee looked at me and said, wait a minute, I ran for this board so I could tell people what to do. You mean I can't walk on campus and tell people what to do? And no. I'll give you another example. I've been on the board 25 years, and we have some administrators that have been at the college that long. I now probably have more tenure at the college than many of the employees. But going back to that, so there are people that I've known for 25 years. I've seen them at board meetings. I see them at social events that we have for the college. We'll have a crab feed or we'll have a gala or something. I'll see them there. So, of course, we're going to be on a first name basis. And of course, we're going to be friends. And I treat them politely. And they don't tell me or don't ask me to do things because they know that I won't. Over the years, they've seen me work as a trustee and keep that boundary there that we can be friends. We can talk about let's say, large issues at the college, whether it's enrollment or what's on the horizon for community colleges statewide or statewide legislation or something like that.
or we can talk about personal things too. How's their cattle farm doing? How's their rice farm doing? Whatever. And just have a polite conversation. I have had people try to approach me about issues, and I would tell them, look, I am not going to engage in that kind of a conversation. You need to go back to your director, to your dean, to your vice president, whatever, and talk about that. But I'm going to stay out of that. Now, I understand at some institutions that trustees serve on committees with the staff. And I've tried to persuade them that that's not always proper, because I've seen what happens when a trustee will walk into a meeting, the staff will turn around and look to that trustee and see where that trustee, what he wants to do, and where he wants the committee to go. And I've seen trustees just take over committee meetings. They're not the chair of the committee, but all of a sudden they're running the committee meeting. And that's not healthy. I mean, if we're there to observe or maybe to participate, we have to know our role and how we should participate. So I served on a committee that was looking over the mission of the college. And I expressed to the committee immediately that my voice is one of many on that committee. And they have as much of a voice there as I do. And so we went through the issues with what should be in the mission statement, what goes in our values. And it was interesting, one time I recommended something and I was voted down. And they all sort of looked at me and I said, that's fine. Let's go with what you've recommended. I mean, it's not my call as an individual. I'm part of a team here. But it makes it difficult when you do that. So we at our institution try not to have trustees serve on many committees at all. Or if it's a committee that's made up of trustees, and that's it. Occasionally, like when we have to do things for accreditation, we might have to have a trustee be on a staff committee and deal with that issue. And that's what we're doing with the mission statement. It's really hard sometimes for trustees not to want to engage in conversations with staff. I've seen them in board meetings call out into the audience and ask a director a question and try to get their opinion on something. And of course the president's sitting there going, well, why isn't that trustee talking to me about this issue? Why are they approaching that director? And that's not the way it should be done. And somehow the board chair at that time needs to intervene and say, wait a minute, that's out of order. We're not calling on individuals. If a director is going to be called upon to speak, it's going to be the president of the college who will ask that director to speak. Our questions have to go through the chair or the president of the board and to the president of the college. That president of the college then can get whoever they feel is necessary to help speak on that issue. And once you develop that culture, our board, a board can fit into that and act appropriately.
Thanks, Bill. Students, you can ask some questions.
And George, if you could, excuse me, because I can't hear your voices aren't being picked up. George, could you sit close to the mic and repeat their question maybe?
Sure, or I could have you come up.
This is Alma. I wanted to go back to, I've never heard of this before. You said you self-assess as board members. Could you tell us a little bit more about that process of self-assessment?
Oh, certainly. It's part of our accreditation standards out here in the Pacific Coast. So we're part of what's called the ACCJC, which is the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges. And we cover California, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands. I think because we have so many colleges, that's why we don't have many states in our accrediting commission. We're not like, the commissions back east where you have 7 or 8 states. So in the accreditation standards, there is a requirement that the board on an annual basis will do a self-evaluation. It doesn't say what is to be included in that self-evaluation, nor does it say what you're to do with that self-evaluation. But of course, why would you do a self-evaluation if you're not going to create an improvement plan, right? So we have an instrument that our board developed. Some boards create very detailed instruments. I think it was San Jose Community College. They have a 36-page document that is created to question the board members and others about the board's performance. We chose to go differently. We looked at the accreditation standards and said, what is the board's responsibility according to the accreditation standard? And then we developed questions for each of those standards. And there were, I think, 30, let's see. I think it was 25 questions that we've developed. And by answering those questions, we can tell if our board is complying with the accreditation standards for what a board is to do. And then we have questions about our goals at the end. So each of the board members is sent that instrument ahead of time, and they answer the questions at home, and then they return that document to the clerk, who summarizes those responses and then gives it the summary to the board. And we go through the summary and talk about those issues that we have identified as that we're not doing well in. And then we talk about, well, okay, so we're not doing well in this. What should we do to correct that issue? And then that then becomes a board goal for the following year. And then during the year, we talk about, well, are we achieving that goal? Are we doing what we said we would do to meet that requirement? So at the end of the year, we do another self-evaluation. And of course, one of the questions is, did we do what we said we would do? And do we resolve that issue? And of course, at the end of our self-evaluation, we have the goals that we set for ourselves for the year and talk about, and then we respond, did we achieve that goal? If not, what do we still need to do? So we might have a goal that our board is going to study the Guided Pathways program. Well, did we have a study session that year on the Guided Pathways program? We may have a goal about retaining a certain or achieving a certain reserve in our budget. Well, did we create that reserve? Did we do the steps we needed to get that reserve established and funded? So did we work with our foundation board and create a promise program or something like that? We do that in public, by the way. This is not a closed session discussion. Now, in most cases, boards will hold a board retreat, not a regular board meeting, and they will talk about their self-evaluation. And usually what happens is at retreats, there's not many people that show up. Now, in the urban area, it may be different. We're a rural community, and so we don't have many people that come to our meetings. But in urban areas, San Francisco, Los Angeles, that sort of thing, people will show up for those meetings and will sit there and listen to the evaluation of the board. And because it's public, people may want to speak up and chide a board for not doing something. So, or the newspaper can report on it and put it into the newspaper. So boards have to be a little guarded about how they do this, depending on what kind of press they get out of it. And we have to record what we say in those documents and provide that as proof to the accrediting commission that we did that. Now, I've run into cases where, as a team member on an accreditation team, where I've gone in and looked at whether a board did that, and I'll find that the board, in a case, there's one case in particular, a board set their goals in a meeting in May, then they did their self-evaluation in July, They had a discussion about it in August, and they didn't do anything. They didn't set any new goals. They didn't say what they were going to do with the self-evaluation. Now, they met the terms of the accreditation standards because they did a self-evaluation, but it didn't mean anything because they didn't say how they're going to improve in the next year. So it's really important for boards to understand why it's there and how it's help them improve their operation.
Any other questions? We have one more.
So, good morning, this is Candy Center. And so my question is, you talked in the article about what you called seagull consulting, going in, dropping, and then leaving. So I'd like to know from you what you think would be meaningful consulting for the board. What does that look like for it from an outsider's perspective?
Well, I did a consulting job recently. Well, let me back up, give you a little history, because I think this is important. In California, our state chancellor's office, who really doesn't have a lot of authority, they're more of a communication link with the state legislature, said we need to help colleges be better prepared for accreditation visits and to overcome some systemic problems. So how can we do that? So we established a program. I say we, the state did it. They set up what's called an Institutional Effectiveness Partnership Initiative, IEPI. And under that program, they can send a team in or an individual in to a college to help them resolve a problem that the college has identified. And if the college identifies a problem and a team goes in and gives them advice on how to overcome that problem, and the college then says, yeah, we're going to do this, they can get money from the state chancellor's office to set up whatever they need in order to resolve that problem or to take steps to resolve the problem. So in this particular case that I worked in, the board was having problems and with communication with the chancellor and communication among the board members. And by the way, it was I think it was in September, October of last year, and one of the board members put out a tweet that had a caricature of Hillary Clinton in a hangman's noose and said we ought to hang her. And if you can imagine, at the next board meeting, the academic senate and the faculty union showed up and wanted that board member to resign. So, you know, there was turmoil going on besides their regular problems that I was asked to go into. So, of course, the normal way, you go in, you do your little consulting visit, you try to give them steps to follow and what they can do, and then you walk away. And you're never heard of again, you don't follow up with them or anything. But in this particular case, because it was under this IEPI program, if they took steps to do certain things, then they would get money to help them do that. So I went in, talked to them about what they needed to do, and then with their staff, set up a program for them to follow. So we set up, in their particular case, it was goals for the board. And then we talked about what they would do, their actions to meet those goals, how they can measure their actions to see if they're achieving their goals. And then, of course, at the end would be to determine whether they met their goals or not. But that would happen 6 months or 12 months down the road. And we set target dates for things to be done by. Then in 3 months, in 6 months, I followed up with them. Did you do that? You know, did you take the steps you were supposed to do? Excuse me. So it was a reminder to the board that they were supposed to take some action. And in this case, it was working quite well. They were taking the steps, they were following through, and they were determining whether or not they were doing it in a timely manner. So they agreed on their monthly agendas to keep those goals in front of themselves with the targets of what they would do. And then at the end of the quarter, end of 6 months, end of 9 months, are they achieving what they said they would do? And then at the end of the year, follow up with a report back to the IEPI program. Did they do what they said they were going to do? So that's a much better way, is to follow through with a district, on the training, because that forces the board to then act on what you've said. I always felt frustrated that if I went in and gave the board a workshop and they didn't follow up, there was no follow-up on my part to force them to do anything. Of course, I couldn't anyways, but there was no reminder that they should be doing this or not, so they could let it slide and not do anything. The work of the consultant is to try to give them that pathway. It's their responsibility as a board to move down that pathway and to follow through. And the president can help them, but it's really the board's role to do that. So I think by having this follow through, if a district would agree to do it all the time, is a much better way of providing consulting. And by the way, because it was under this program, they didn't have to pay me anything. I came in and the program paid me, and the follow-up and that sort of thing they didn't have to pay for as well.
Great, thanks, Bill. Other questions, students? So Bill, earlier we had a session accreditation and beamed in Barbara Gelman-Danley from Higher Learning.
George, I can't hear you.
We had an earlier session on accreditation, and I know you do work for the Accreditation Commission. I know we were all relieved when the City College of San Francisco was reaccredited. I know that you were on an appeals committee, and I don't know how much is confidential there, but can you tell the students a little bit about what that work entailed, being on an appeals committee when City College of San Francisco was losing its accreditation?
Oh, sure. The standards, the accreditation standards call for a district, if they're facing imminent termination of their accreditation, to appeal that decision by the staff, I shouldn't say by the staff, by the Accreditation Commission, to a panel appointed by the commission to hear their appeal and to determine whether or not the commission acted properly, or if they need to take other steps. Do they follow their standards that they have in making their decision? So I was selected to be the board president of that appeals panel. And I had to work closely with our own attorney. We had an attorney then appointed as an attorney for the appeals panel. We had a 5-member panel. The panel consists of a faculty member, a retired accreditation commission, a college president, myself as a trustee, and I can't remember the 5th person's role. I forget right now. And then the college had their administration and attorney, and the commission had their attorney and administration. One of our early decisions was how many attorneys would be allowed into the room. And it was interesting because people started, the college wanted like 4 or 5 attorneys, and the commission said, well, if they're going to have a group of attorneys, we should be allowed a group of attorneys. And we finally, talking to the attorney to the panel, I said, oh my God, we could have 11 attorneys in the room. We'll never get a decision, right? So we decided to limit it to where the college could have 2 attorneys, the commission could have 2 attorneys, and the panel would just have 1. The appeals process took 4 days, and it allowed for the college to introduce evidence and speakers to support their claim that they were taking steps to resolve the problems and should not have their accreditation terminated, but rather be put on probation and given more time to resolve the situation. They weren't claiming that they hadn't violated the rules. They were claiming that they were responding to it and needed more time. The commission said they've already had time enough and they need to lose their accreditation. So prior to the hearing, we had something like 300 or 400 pages of evidence provided to us. And the stipulation was that the evidence before the hearing had to go to both attorneys for the college and the attorneys for the commission and be approved by them before it could come to us. So I know there was a lot of back and forth material going around that never got to us. And finally, they got 300 pages to us. Then we showed up for the first day of hearing. And at the first day of hearing, they had the opportunity to present evidence. The college handed us the biggest binder I've ever seen in my life. And it contained something like 800 pages of evidence to support their case. Now I've got a binder of 800 pages that they expected me to read in the next 3 days, so on the fourth day I can make a decision. The commission didn't hand me a binder of a couple hundred pages, so I now had 1,000 pages to read. And I'm going, oh, great, how am I going to get through all this? And then they had the witnesses come in, and about the third day of the hearing, the college asked for a recess to take all the audience out of the room, and they just have the attorneys in the room with the college administrator and the president of the commission and the panel and myself and the attorney for the panel. And we had to review whether new evidence would be permitted in at that time because it wasn't provided at the beginning of the hearing. Well, the new evidence was letters from Nancy Pelosi and Barbara Boxer and other people in Congress telling us that we should not be terminating the accreditation of San Francisco City College. So now we're entering this arena of politics, right? How do I value the validity or the what this letter is saying versus what the commission has said about whether they meet the standards or not? Again, the letters didn't talk about whether the college was meeting the standards. They just really said, don't cut their accreditation. So we knew a lot of eyes were on us, and they were trying to bring in the big guns with political heat. So we spent then a lot of hours that night and the next morning crafting a decision. And the panel, of course, sitting in meetings going through the language. And the kind of person I am, I'm what they call a controller, and I make decisions real fast. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about the language, et cetera. But we had an English faculty member on the panel, and she drove me nuts. But it's what we needed, but she drove me nuts because she went through every word of those decisions and determined whether we were grammatically correct or not, and that sort of thing. And so it just made it really long and laborious, and we're retyping and all this stuff. So we finally came out and got the verbal decision, and then we had 30-some days after that to print the written decision that we followed. And the written decision was that I had to sign was 37 pages long. So nothing was simple when you get English professors and attorneys, right? So anyway, we basically upheld the commission that their action to terminate the accreditation of the college was correct, and but found that in the commission's regulations that there was sort of a loophole that said if a college appeals to our panel, that the panel then can allow the institution time to correct the problems. And so we worried about that loophole as we went through this decision. And the panel's decision was, okay, let's give the college 6 more months. And in 6 months, we'll see how the college is operating and whether or not they're meeting the standards that the commission has set for them. And by the way, they had 2,000 work items on a list that they needed to correct, that they self-identified 2,000 things they needed to do in order to meet the standards of the accrediting commission. So the commission then took our recommendation, and in the midst of that, the academic or the faculty senate the faculty union, I'm sorry, from the college, and joined by the mayor of San Francisco, sued the commission over this decision. And the judge was sort of saying, well, yeah, you need to work something out with the college and that sort of thing. Rather, you can't just pull their accreditation. And so at one time, I was going to be called as a witness to appear in court in this court case. For some reason, it never got to fruition because the commission and the college worked out a separate agreement and gave the college one more year in order, what they said was, you're not going to be accredited, but you can reapply for accreditation as if you were a new institution. And during that application for accreditation, your students will be treated as if they're accredited or going to an accredited institution. So the college and the commission worked out that agreement. They had 2 years to then comply. The commission went back in and did a visit, and in the interim, the leadership of the commission was changed, and the new leadership recertified the accreditation of the college. Now, the problems haven't all gone away. That college, during this transition period, all this turmoil, lost something like 35% of their enrollment. So that would be a dramatic hit on their budget. But the city of San Francisco and the governor stepped in and said, we'll give them some emergency funding to help them through that transition. And the college is still down in enrollment and now has gone through their funding period where they had the extra money. So I don't know if they're going to be able to keep up with what they're required to do. It'll be interesting to see what happens during the next accreditation visit. But it gets very political with a community that has a lot of political juice, like the city of San Francisco and the federal legislators that represent them.
Great, thanks, Bill.
And throughout that, nobody put my name on a wanted poster and came to shoot me.
Great. Well, we really appreciate your spending this much of your Saturday with us, Bill. But before we let you go, can you give some words of advice to our doctoral students?
Yeah, I think college presidents in the future have to really focus on being change agents, really have to have the ability to take risks and make change. Our organizations for too long have felt comfortable in what we were doing and really didn't face up to the needs of our communities. The graduation rates, the ability to transfer more students to four-year institutions and that sort of thing. The occupations in our society are changing. We have to keep abreast of those changes and prepare workers for the future and not for the past. So there's a lot of challenges facing us. And trustees, we need to give the president the ability to take risks and to learn from mistakes and not terminate presidents because of mistakes. Making a mistake is a way of learning and probably one of the best learning processes out there. And you have to then, try to correct those mistakes, of course, and learn from them. And too often we don't try to use that as a teaching opportunity, so to speak, and go back and rebuild what happened and why we made that decision and how we could have acted differently, and then learn from that and go on. I would hope that as you move into leadership roles in your institutions, that you're given the opportunity to really make change and to step out there and be a pioneer without getting too many arrows in your back. The other is, I think, really, if you move up into those positions, to find a mentor, someone that's been there for a while, knows the community you're in, or maybe the state, and understands the kinds of challenges you've faced in the past or in the future, and can give you advice on how to think through it. They don't necessarily have to give you the answer of what to do, but they can give you the answer of how to think it through, and who to talk to in your community, and who to talk to on your boards, and that sort of thing, and how to get those decisions. I know when I was a city manager, I didn't have I had a mentor to start with. He moved away, and I didn't have a good mentor after that. And I really struggled at times in difficult situations without the ability to find someone to sort of hold my hand and help me think through a problem. So I really think that's important. And if the job isn't a good fit, find one that is. Find a board that is supportive. If you got a board that just keeps taking shots at you, look, you're not a target. You don't have to be, to go through that. They're creating a hostile work environment. If you can't change that hostile work environment, find one that's not hostile to you, because the stress of that and the problems it will create for you personally are just too great to suffer through as a college president. The job is difficult enough without having to be a target for everybody.
Great. Thanks very much, Bill. Students, let's thank Mr. McGinnis. Have a good rest of your weekend, Bill.
Good luck to you all in your careers.
Thank you.
I'm done.